Hello, everyone. My name is Jericka Duncan, and I'm a CBS News correspondent, and you are listening to the I Am That Reporter podcast and watching, hopefully, too. Today is a special day. I have the honor and privilege of sitting here with a rare find in the field of journalism. I'm talking about no other than Miss Martha Teichner. She is a correspondent for CBS Sunday Morning and has been a correspondent there since 1993. She has reported on a wide range of issues, including politics, the arts, culture, science, and social issues impacting our world. Teichner joined CBS News in 1977. Her groundbreaking career has spanned the gamut of the human experience. She has witnessed and reported on some of the modern era's most significant national and international stories. Everything from the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the death of Princess Diana, the life of Nelson Mandela, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the protests following the murder of George Floyd. Earlier in her career, Teichner was among the first women working for a network television news division to cover international wars, including the Lebanon War, the First Intifada in 1988 in Israel, and the West Bank, the war in El Salvador, the conflicts associated with the collapse of Yugoslavia. Her reporting has earned multiple national awards, including 16 Emmy Awards, 6 James Beard Foundation Awards, and a Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award. She recently was inducted into the Deadline Club New York Journalism Hall of Fame, where she gave a riveting speech about her incredible career. And that was part of the reason why I wanted you to join me for this very important podcast, because we are at a time as journalists, where we are really fighting to let people know journalism still matters. So first of all, thank you for all of the work that you've done and that you do to advance what it means to be a journalist. But let's start with that. Why is journalism important?
Journalism is important because it is a means in our society where the First Amendment is the First Amendment of the Constitution, where we bear witness, where we show people what's happening, we hold the powerful to account, we tell wonderful stories, we tell sad stories, we tell sweet stories. We are a lens whereby people see their society. It's utterly important in terms of our comprehension of who we are, where we are in our time.
I like to quote Susan Zirinsky, former president of CBS News, when she said, "Our job is to show America to itself."
And the world.
And the world.
Not just America.
But just, I mean, like when you think about that, it's like the good, the bad, the ugly. And, you know, sometimes we don't like what we see, but I think it is still a place where when you are able to expose the truth, then you are then able to make better informed decisions when it comes to voting, when it comes to schools, when it comes to all of these decisions that we have to make as individuals.
That's right. That's really true. Because without information and without accurate information, you're making flawed decisions. You're having flawed perceptions.
One of the things I've always admired about you, Martha, and I'm sure you get this a lot, is your writing. You know, your ability to, even if you're not watching the program, you could close your eyes and feel like you're there. And I remember asking you a couple of years ago when I stumbled upon the 6th floor in your office at that time, and I asked you, does it get any easier?
No, it's never easy. I still, when I start a story, sit down to write after I've looked at all the video and gone through all the transcripts and started to think about how I'm going to structure the story and so on. I still get waves of panic. I still am afraid. I still torture myself because I have to tap into the story in my brain and in my subconscious to try to figure out how to write it the best way I know how. And in a way, the story dictates its own tone. You do each story according to it. It's an entity, and it tells you how to tell it. And finding that path into the right way to tell it, so that people understand it, so that people empathize with what it's after, the people in it, and so on and so forth. You have to kind of hear its message, and it isn't just writing the sentences that declare the facts. It's absorbing multiple dimensions of what that story is and finding a way to tell it by its terms.
Are you writing the story while you're there? Are you making a note of, I need to make sure does a line come to you during that process?
No.
It's always after you've sat with it.
After I've watched every single frame of video and gone through all the transcripts. When I'm out on a story, I'm thinking of basically the elements of the story as I know it. Sunday morning stories are rarely breaking stories.
Right.
We're doing, on big issues, we're doing analysis more than we're doing anything that's breaking. And when we go out on stories, they're generally planned in advance, because you don't walk out the door and spend money unless you know pretty much where you're going, who you're going to interview.
Right.
You don't necessarily know all of what they're going to say, but there is a sense of what you need to tell the story, what elements are out there, what pictures you need to shoot in order to tell the story. And obviously there's serendipity along the way. There are things that happen that are unexpected, but you still are thinking about, well, we need to have pictures of this street, because if you don't see what's happening on this street, you won't understand what happened in this house and why it happened. And so you're thinking structurally,
right,
about what you need to tell the story. So
almost like different scenes.
Yeah, you have a real sense of well, we need to have this person showing us X, because otherwise we won't understand what they're talking about. But then I don't really know the language and the final structure of the story until I've seen everything and done the interviews and gone back to the transcripts and watched all the video.
Very important. Are you encouraged by the journalism that you're seeing today, or does it make you nervous? And by that I mean some of the younger folks coming up. We all know that while we have linear television, there's an effort to be on streaming. There's an effort to be on social media, in the social media space. Obviously, we still do radio. I know just yesterday I was doing a report, and literally it was about covering all facets of what we do and how we disseminate information. But are you encouraged by the younger group that's kind of coming up now?
Yes and no. Some of each. There are people who are really smart and really good, but I'm also uncomfortable because many young people who call themselves journalists coming up now are not necessarily reporting within the framework of what I understand journalism to be. And it becomes...
Give me an example.
Well, I can't think of any particular story, but it's where the line is crossed about opinion.
I see.
One example I can think of, which I'm uncomfortable with.
Okay.
There was an influencer who went to daycare centers in Minneapolis with the intention of proving that they were fraudulent.
Right.
And there were questions raised after the fact when an influencer claimed to show that there were no kids there,
right,
that there had been kids there, that there were other circumstances. Yes, there was fraud in the daycare field in Minneapolis, but you were seeing someone very selectively showing what they wanted to show, as opposed to engaging in full-fledged journalism, the kind that the CBS affiliate in Minneapolis was engaging in, which was massive investigation.
And had been talking about before this person became
Absolute.
Well known. You know
the
what?
full picture rather than the slice that person wanted to influence people over that wasn't necessarily accurate.
And you don't consider that journalism, but it kind of gets lumped into
That's correct.
that category because I've seen people, the comments are like, how come you can't be like him? And it's like, wait a minute, that's not what we do.
Well,
and we do that, but in a way that shows the breadth of an investigation, not just, as you said, kind of going in with this idea and wanting to make sure it's framed in a certain way.
Well, the problem...
But it did get a lot of attention.
It got a lot of attention. Yeah. Part of the issue with all of that is that a lot of people, younger people in particular, who get their information from their phones, don't know the difference between journalism and influencing. Yeah. And they don't understand how to go about finding sources that can be trusted and distinguishing between different outlets.
Yeah.
And it's very hard. I don't blame the public because they look around and they know where it's easy to go on your phone and find stuff. But how the big issue today is, in my opinion, how to educate the news-consuming public as to what's news and what isn't.
Right. Yeah, it's tough. It's a battle because I think, I always say people have their lived experiences and they kind of know certain things based on whatever community they're living in and what they're seeing the world through that lens. And there's certain things I like to remind people we can't make up that there was 10 inches of snow in the last 3 days. I can't, there's certain, I just covered the sentencing for Sean Grayson, who was convicted of murdering Sonia Massey in her home. Some of these things are just, it's a fact. But you're right, it is a struggle to remind people that, our goal and purpose is to report what we know, to report the truth, to tell you where we're getting the information from, and let the viewers decide.
Well, I feel that very strongly. And traditionally, CBS, over many, many, many decades, has had the gold standards of standards.
Right.
And they boil down to park your politics at the door, do not express your personal opinions, look at the facts, don't manipulate material, you can't go to demonstrations, you can't post your opinion online, you can't give money to political parties, you can't campaign for candidates. I went to college with Hillary Clinton. I've known her since I was 17 years old. When she was running for president, practically our entire graduating class from college was supposed to gather at the Javits Center, which was her election night headquarters. Right. I had to say, no, I can't be there because I'm not covering her campaign because it's improper to do that. It's a conflict of interest. And even though it wasn't according to my political positions or whatever, it was because I was a member of the class of 69 and so was she, and our entire class was gathering. I had to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't be there. It violates CBS standards because that when you essentially give up your rights to be part of this profession, you're doing it so that you're bending over backwards to be fair to the people that you encounter on your stories, even if you loathe them.
Right.
When I worked in South Africa, there were times when I had to interview people from the apartheid government, people who were implicated in killing people. And I had to bend over backwards knowing that I loathed those people and detested what they represented. The way I did it was to knock myself out, to be excessively polite, to be just check myself at every turn so that I gave them their say.
Right.
And I always figured that if you give them their say and you give other people their say, people will perceive the truth. They will come to conclusions. I don't want to be in a position where I am wrongly allowing people to use me, and you have to ask questions so that you're not being used, so that you become a vehicle for people to tell their stories or express their views, but you can't let them run away with you. On the other hand, you also you have to give context.
Is it tough to navigate deciding what party to go to, what function to go to, because in the back of your mind, you're always thinking, I'm a journalist first?
I think it's harder in Washington than it is if you're not in Washington. I think it's very hard in Washington because you're constantly having to go and listen. Things that happen at parties where there are powerful people. If you're invited as a journalist, if the people around you trust you, then you hear things, and you can't cut yourself off from hearing things that might happen at a party.
Right.
But on the other hand, you have to make everybody understand that in the end, you're a journalism, and that all you have to offer is your reputation for fairness and your honesty.
That's right.
And your obligation to the people you're reporting to, as well as the people you're reporting on.
I want you, if you could, I highlighted, let me grab this for you. When you were speaking about your experience in South Africa, I would like for you to read part of your speech from when you were...
The part you've highlighted?
Yes, the part that I highlighted. So when you were inducted into the Deadline Club Hall of Fame, you gave this speech. And in this section that I highlighted, you talk about your experience, part of your experience in Johannesburg, if you don't mind reading that for us.
While I was the CBS correspondent in Johannesburg, my producer, a camera crew, and I raced to a massacre in KwaZulu near Durban. A tribal faction had entered a house in the middle of the night looking for an enemy. They slaughtered 13 people, 7 of them children. It turned out the guy they were after wasn't even there. When we finally made it to the scene, the bodies were gone. Too late. Story's over, my colleague said. They didn't even notice what I saw. The women. There was blood everywhere. 6 women, old, heavy-set, in shapeless dresses, their feet bare, their heads covered, were slowly mopping the blood away, swaying, singing, in the kind of haunting harmony I've only ever heard the likes of in Africa. That was the story. It was a ritual as ancient as human conflict, profound, and so telling about the cost of violence, of war, the mundane, below the headline detail that says so much about history.
When you take the reader and anyone listening to that moment with those words, what did you want people to take away from that speech and also the many experiences that you were able to summarize in your 50-year journalism career?
Well, in the line before that, I talk about, I got into news to chase truth with a capital T, but what was this? I learned it was lesson 1 in understanding that news can be a small tragedy. It doesn't have to be D-Day or politics. I learned that I couldn't stop myself from feeling while working, and that's a good thing. Well, that's what that was about. That if you are seeing exciting kind of shoot 'em up kind of stuff,
right,
connected with war or conflict or whatever, that's it's kind of obvious. It's terrible. It shows conflict in its most obvious form, but then you go to a place like that massacre. It was devastating to see what I saw. And my male colleagues didn't, as I said, didn't even notice. They just said, it's too late, because the bodies were gone, and the people who were being accused of doing the killing and so on, they were gone, and so on. But I looked and I saw the sadness of mothers. I saw the just eternal awfulness of the aftermath of conflict and war and violence, and saw the honor that these women were doing the dead, the children, the mothers, the people who were in that house. And I thought, this is huge. This is something that nobody seeing this can see it and not understand the breadth of the tragedy here. And I thought, this is what I have to show in this story, because it's much more telling than just bodies on the ground or people with guns and that sort of thing, because that's the expected.
Right.
I remember when in the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, a lot of people saw the briefings from Riyadh that the generals put on every day, and you saw General Schwarzkopf showing the videos of gun cameras from the planes that were dropping bombs, and you'd see the explosions on the videos that were recorded from the gun cameras.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to my godson and his brothers who lived in London, and it looked like a video game to them. It was you didn't see the people who were on the receiving end of that explosion.
Right.
And to them it was, wow, this is cool. And what they didn't see was what we saw as the people that I was working with when we went out to what we called, there were two highways of death. There was one big one where you saw just mountains of debris from the bombing. And then there was a second one where it was further east from Baghdad back up to, or from Kuwait back up to Baghdad.
Yeah.
Just to review, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and had his soldiers there, and a coalition of more than 30 countries led by the United States and Britain and a couple of other European nations liberated Kuwait, and the Iraqi soldiers went back to, tried to run away back to Iraq, and the highways of death were what was left as they tried to escape, and American bombers carpet bombed their way. And
how does that impact your spirit?
I think it makes me more human. What we saw in the highways of death, we went out with an Arabic translator and a military guide and so on and so forth, and we looked at what was left, and one of the highways of death, there were these little kind of small pickup trucks with a kind of canvas cover like a covered wagon, and they were personnel trucks. And we picked up ledgers.
Yeah.
And these ledgers were documenting the activities of various soldiers. There was a picture, and then everything that was part of their service record as soldiers. And what we found out was that there were soldiers who, just basically dozens and dozens of them, all maybe thousands, but we saw in the same ledgers dozens, who had all come from the same town, that Saddam Hussein had dragooned these people into being in the army, and that they had been forced to go to war. And you look at their columns of service, and always the longest column was desertion. They didn't want to be there.
Right.
And then on another, the other highway of death, we were there with dead soldiers, and strewn around was the stuff that was looted, and everybody talked about the soldiers looting as they were leaving. Well, we saw dead soldiers where a few inches from their hands were little toy yellow rubber duckies. One of them near his body was a wedding dress. And they were taking things back for their families, for their children. Why would you think of looting as, it's a terrible thing?
Right.
A guy with 3 inches from his dead hand, a yellow rubber ducky. And you realize that, again, these soldiers who didn't want to be there were just trying to get back to Iraq and taking something that maybe they could take to their children. And it completely changed your view of who these forces were that Saddam Hussein press-ganged into being there.
Yeah.
And it was the small tragedy. And you saw just this awfulness.
Yeah.
And there were people in cars that had been carpet bombed who they were fried. And there were American soldiers who came and were along there, the same highway of death, who would take selfies with themselves next to these cars full of fried soldiers, and they would jokingly call them crispy critters. And I remember the cameraman that I was working with, who was German, he got so angry at that attitude that we had to restrain him to keep him from trying to beat up some of the soldiers who were laughing and calling these dead people crispy critters. And we saw dogs, wild dogs, eating the bodies and so on and so forth. And all of that, that's the horror. And it does, I think, it really deepens your sense of what it means to be a human being and how to assess in real time on the ground what, when you hear it in the macro, it's Iraqi forces were trying to retreat back to Iraq.
Right.
They were the bad guy because we were trying to liberate Kuwait from this bad guy, Saddam Hussein. But the Iraqi forces who were acting supposedly in the name of the bad guy, they were just poor schmucks who died there and were, in a sense, were being exploited. And you couldn't help but see that. And you didn't know their politics, but you did see their military records where the biggest single entry in any of their records was desertion. And and again, how can that not affect you? How can you not feel deeply?
So, I mean, it teaches you to obviously stay open. I mean, I feel like you have to have a more open mind when you are confronted with that type of tragedy, when you cover certain stories. You go in thinking one thing, but sometimes, the truth is revealed to you as a storyteller. And the goal is that we get to do that and share with other people to help them see that it's usually not so black and white. It's not so good and bad.
Well, the geopolitical is very different from the micro that you're seeing with your own eyes on the ground.
No, it's always different. I always feel that way. I mean, this is no comparison, but storm coverage, even when I watch it on television, it's nothing like when you're there and you can see it and you're there and you can feel the energy from somebody who just lost everything and now has to start over. I want to read to you also something else that struck me. And I think this is, these are some of your last words in this.
Last words?
No,
I'm not dead
no.
yet.
You're not last words. Last words in this speech that I think it was like, man, I remember emailing someone and I said, she's right. Like, I don't think people will have careers like you have. And it's a shame. It really is. Because I think you get into this career, especially at a network level, thinking you have all of these opportunities. And we do. But due to costs, due to budgets, no one's sending people to cover what's happening in Ethiopia right now and the millions of people who've been displaced. Not in the same way that I think perhaps we would have covered it, or other networks too would have covered it 20 or 30 years ago. But you say, I learned that journalism is the greatest adventure there is and the greatest education. I also learned that it's not just a job. Each day on assignment is a day out of my life to be lived fully. It's not something that gets in the way of my life. I learned what a privilege it is to be allowed to tell stories and the importance of telling them. But this part right here is when I was like, get a little choked up. You said, like every other woman of my generation helping to break down barriers in news, I experienced sexism, sexual harassment, even sexual assault. There were setbacks, but I endured, overcame, sacrificed, outlasted. It was worth it. I hope I helped ease the way for other women. Yes, you did.
Oh, thank you.
And then you say, today I'm not sure it's possible to have a career in television news like mine anymore. News is so fragmented and fragile. The country is even more divided than it was when I first wondered how to figure out what was true. I'm still trying, and I'm deeply grateful for the 50 plus years I've been able to keep at it, and for this award. Thank you. But I mean, when you said that, I said, I don't think people can have this type of career, which is also why I wanted to interview you. I find that disheartening. Do you?
I do too, because it just, the budgets aren't there. I don't think companies are as loyal to their employees as they used to be.
Yeah.
The audiences, when I started at CBS News, Walter Cronkite was the anchor of the CBS Evening News. And every night, his audience, every night,
It's like 30 million or something.
it was over 20 million.
Yeah.
And now you combine ABC, NBC, CBS together,
Right.
it's not 20 million. And that affects the amount of money that's available to cover stories.
I want to switch gears a little bit because I spoke to someone that you may know, Craig Wilson. He's the executive producer for Weekend News. He worked at Sunday Morning for 5 years.
I don't know him well.
Okay. So he said, when I told him, I'm like, I'm going to sit down with Martha Teichner and I get to ask her some questions about the business. And he's like, what does she think about the Sunday Morning cult following? Like, do you go places and people stop you all the time? And what is that like?
Daily, at least once, sometimes far more times than that.
How does that feel?
It feels really good. It's not like the paparazzi after, some pop star or something, or some movie star.
Right.
It's individuals who love our show, who go to the trouble of getting up and watching at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning on the East Coast, 6 o'clock on the West Coast, or recording it and watching it later and are devoted to it. They don't have to do it. It's a destination for them. And they come up and speak to you about how much they love the show. And I feel really touched by that and humbled by that because they bother. And I've always thought of myself as something of a public servant. I have an obligation to the people I cover, and I have an obligation to the people who watch. And my job is to essentially be fair to both of them and to do justice to both of them and knock myself out to communicate in the clearest and most honest and hopefully sometimes eloquent way that I know how to convey the interests of both. And when people from the audience come up and say, we went on a trip to Italy and we followed the whole itinerary that the Sunday Morning Italy show took, and we're just coming back. Thank you for doing that show. Or people saying, the story you did on finding glass orbs on Block Island just made me happy. And they remember these stories for years. People have quoted lines to me of stories that I don't even remember the line in my own story.
Wow.
From years past. a week ago, I got an email from someone who remembered the glass orb story on Block Island, but also years and years and years ago, probably 20 years ago, I did a story about the origins of Thousand Island dressing, and we went to the Thousand Islands, and we did silly stuff. We took a lettuce on the ferry, and we traced the supposed origins and the controversy over whether this one was the genuine one or whether that was the genuine one. She remembered that story.
How much of those stories, is it you thinking of some unique way to get into this story and the producer? I mean, because I feel like,
above.
And it's the bar feels so high. I mean, it's not easy I've pitched to Rand Morrison, who's the executive producer, and he's tough.
Yeah, well, that's because he feels, he sees, he has a sense of the rhythm of the show and the mix of the stories and the sense of how they should be written and what the subject matter should be and so on and so forth. And, but, it's a combination. We get assignments from Rand from the top down.
Yep.
Producers come to me and say, well, do you want to do the story with me? And I'll say, well, let me look at my schedule. Or I'll go and suggest a story.
Yeah.
And Rand will say yes or no. And then a producer will be assigned and so on.
Yeah.
So the story ideas come from everybody, from the top down and from side to side and the bottom up. And we get, sometimes they come even from viewers.
Yep.
And we are constantly being pitched by publicists, and wading through the publicists is a full-time job practically for some of the people on the show and so on. But there's a lot of collaboration between the producer and the correspondent, and you're trying to think of the best way to tell the story.
When you think of 5-year-old Martha Teichner, who loved to observe and loved to write at an early age, did you imagine any of this for yourself?
I didn't know what existed then, but I imagined telling stories because it was so much a part of me from my earliest memories.
Yeah.
When you're an only child who lives in the country and your mother teaches you to read and write before you go to school in self-defense because I had no playmates, my father would let me use his typewriter and give me, those are the days of carbon paper, and he would have the white sheets for the real letter and then the yellow sheets.
It's like, don't mess up.
So were for the carbons that you save in the files. He would let me have the yellow sheets to write, and I would write little newspapers on his typewriter and tell the stories I knew. I would write little stories about the birds. I would write that lived outside our house. I would write stories about the people that my parents knew and so on and so forth. And so it was always part of me. But I think when I got my very first job, real news job, well, I'm not sure, to some people it might not seem real. My first broadcast job was one of two reporters at a country western music station, radio station in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And when I set foot in that station on my first day of work, and I was essentially being shown how everything worked, I knew, as surely as I knew my name, that I was going to end up a network television reporter.
Wow.
Because it was so clear to me that this was my path, that the country western radio station, I was going to learn and I was going to grow and I was going to demand more experience and more opportunity. And one by one, the jobs came along. And
look at you now.
Well, lots of years later. But it was because I knew that it was the right place for me. I had considered going to law school, and I ended up turning down law school because I thought, I'm afraid of advocacy. What if I'm hired by somebody who's awful, and I'm a hired gun on behalf of somebody that I think is just unethical or dishonest or wrong.
You said instead I'd rather just interview those people.
Well, I wanted to be in the public arena
Yeah.
in some way because I came of age at a very fraught time
Right.
when the civil rights era was in its peak time and when the Vietnam War was dividing the country. And again, it was in some ways similar to now because the country was very culturally and ideologically divided.
And speaking on that, because I know can't get too much into viewpoints, so to speak, but do you think, based on the history that you've lived and experienced, that we get through this very divided time now? Because it just seems like, as we're sitting here today, the news broke that Don Lemon was arrested, who used to be a former CNN anchor, who's now, doing his own independent thing. But do you think we will see ourselves out of this on the other side?
Because I don't know.
You don't know?
I simply don't know. It always, in the past, I felt that at some level you could trust that things would turn out okay.
And now?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I simply don't know. In the 60s and 70s, you had Watergate, and Republicans demanded that Richard Nixon resign.
Right.
And there was yes, there was division, but there was unanimity on the bipartisan unanimity on certain matters when the country was something bigger than the ideology. And right now we are so divided, and I just don't know where it will lead.
Yeah.
As for the Don Lemon matter, and you can add to that the other journalist who was arrested, and you can add to that a few weeks ago the searching of the home of a Wall Street Journal reporter when she wasn't even the object of the potential investigation. I care about the First Amendment in all its forms, and I don't like to see any erosion of the importance of the First Amendment. The First Amendment was the First Amendment for a reason. It was important to the framers of the Constitution for a reason, the freedom of the press.
Central to our democracy.
It's central to our democracy. And without siding with anybody, I think that preservation of the First Amendment is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Voices of dissent need to be heard. People reporting on events need to be protected so that they can observe in an honest way.
Yeah.
And it concerns me when reporters when people try to restrict reporters doing their jobs in any way. Not just Don Lemon and the Washington Post reporter, but flip side of that, restricting free speech in terms of censorship in any kind of form that you might see in reporting.
Right.
Because it can go both ways. It isn't just this side that is being pressured at this point. Next time it could be that side.
Right.
You just don't know. But it's critical that the American public understands and preserves the First Amendment.
Well said.
I don't know whether it is or not.
I think it is, and I think a lot of people agree with you, and I appreciate your honesty and me wanting an answer. Like, Martha, what's it going to be? What's going to happen?
I have no idea how this will play out.
I hope you enjoyed yourself. Did you have a good time?
Yes.
Kind of, sort of. I know we've covered some very heavy ground, but I truly admire the work that you do. I'm so proud to call you a colleague.
Thank you very much.
And I appreciate you.
It's a pleasure to call you a colleague, too.
Thank you. That means a lot.
I've seen you grow since I first met you, when you first started.
Yeah.
I've watched you grow, and that's a good thing.
Thank you. I'm still growing.
Well, you work on it till every day of your career and your life.
Yeah. My conversation with Martha Teichner. You're watching the I Am That Reporter podcast. Thank you for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe.